Welcome to the Imago Leadership Podcast, where we explore the habits, stories, and spiritual practices that form wise, emotionally mature, mission-shaping leaders.
Welcome back to the Imago Leadership Podcast, where we explore the spiritual, relational, and ethical dimensions of leadership in a world that is constantly trying to unform us. I'm your host, Lee Carter, and today we're stepping into a conversation that sits at the intersection of culture, scripture, and the deep human longing to belong. This episode is called The Language of Belonging, and I want to begin with a story, one that many of you will recognize even if you haven't watched the film in years. In 1999, The Matrix exploded onto the screen with a vision of reality that was both unsettling and strangely familiar. In the film, most humans live unaware that their world is a digital simulation. The real world has collapsed, and intelligent machines now harvest human energy to sustain themselves, to keep people docile. The machines plug them into a lifelike virtual reality called the Matrix, where they go about their daily lives believing everything is normal. The story follows Thomas Anderson, a quiet computer programmer by day and a hacker named Neo by night. Neo senses that something about his world is off, as if reality itself is glitching. His search for answers leads him to Morpheus, a leader of the human resistance who reveals the truth. The world Neo knows is an illusion, and humanity has been enslaved by the very technology it created. And then comes the moment everybody remembers, and we often quote it. Morpheus offers Neo a choice between the blue pill or the red pill. Take the blue pill, and he will forget the conversation and return to the comfortable illusion of the Matrix. But take the red pill, and he will awaken to the real world, a world that has been degraded and dehumanized, painful and dangerous, but true nonetheless. It would have been so much easier for Neo to choose the blue pill, to go back to his comfortable, albeit illusory, life. But Neo chooses awakening. He chooses truth. He chooses to join the resistance dedicated to freeing the world from the domination of evil powers bent on reducing it to a lifeless wasteland, devoid of hope and purpose. Now, why begin a leadership conversation with a scene from The Matrix? Because this moment captures something profoundly biblical and something that I think leadership in its most compelling and healthy form is a divine vocation meant to dispel the darkness of an unformed cosmos. In the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus presents people with what I would call the red pill of his kingdom. He invites them to awaken, not to a dystopian wasteland, but to the truth of God's world as it really is and as it is meant to be. I think the language of the sermon is a shock treatment meant to open us to a kingdom reality that this dark world tries to hide from us and its illusions of power, prestige, and distorted values. The Creator made the world purposeful and good. He intended it to be a theater declaring the glory of God. But a discordant tone now threatens and undermines its harmonious unity. Eden, the place of delight, pleasure, and wholeness, the word Eden is the Hebrew for pleasure. It was the temple where humans, made as God's image, were invited to live and commune with God like priests in the most holy place of all creation, where heaven and earth met. In the ancient Near East, kings would place images of themselves throughout their kingdom to remind people who was king and to whom they owed their allegiance and their honor. In Eden, God places his image, and through their work, worship, and rest as God's image bearers, the delight, pleasure, and goodness of Eden was to extend to the whole earth so that the entire cosmos knew the goodness of this king's reign. Humanity, created in God's image, was meant to be formed by God's wisdom through a learning process in loving communion with their Creator. But in Genesis 2 and 3, they swallowed the serpent's deception of instant knowledge of good and evil. Like choosing the blue pill, they reached for promised godlike enlightenment, but ended up severed from the life of God that forms them in his wisdom. And the result? They gave way to the formless and empty of Genesis 1-2. It came back into the world as an ongoing menace that unforms God's very good creation. This is not just a theological idea, it is a lived reality. We see it in our relationships, our workplaces, our politics, and communities. We see it in the ways people are dehumanized, divided, and diminished. We see it in the ways leaders use power to dominate rather than to bless. And into this world, Jesus speaks. Before Jesus ever opens his mouth to teach, Matthew gives us a picture of the people gathered around him. And it's not the crowd we might expect. Matthew writes that Jesus ministers to all kinds of people who have been unformed by the formless and empty: the diseased, the sick, the suffering, the seizure-ridden, the paralyzed, and the demon-possessed. Even more astounding is that these people are drawn to him from all over, not just Jews, but also Gentiles. Word about him spreads throughout Syria, Galilee, the Decapolis, Jerusalem, Judea, beyond the Jordan River. These ethnic and political divisions have manifested the formless and empty for centuries, yet they are all drawn to Jesus, and he is making them whole. He is forming them into a new community, a new people who belong to him and to each other. This is the context for the Sermon on the Mount. Jesus is not giving a list of moral commands to individuals. He is recreating his people, a community, and he's restoring the vocation of humanity as image bearers who reflect God's glory into the world. The sermon is not just good religious devotion. Jesus is being very political here. And the first words out of his mouth are words of blessing. Matthew tells us when he saw the crowds, he went up the mountain. After he sat down, his disciples came to him. Then he began to teach them, saying, and then come the Beatitudes, this litany of blessing that echoes the divine pronouncement, very good, from Genesis 1. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for the kingdom of heaven belongs to them. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be satisfied. Blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called the children of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness, for the kingdom of heaven belongs to them. What an incredible blessing, but also what an incredible shock. Poor in spirit, meek, hungry and thirsty, merciful, persecuted. Jesus is saying these are the blessed in God's kingdom. Jesus is saying these are the ones who will rewrite history and reform God's deformed creation. We wouldn't expect these kinds of people, but this is who God places his blessing upon. And it's the language of belonging. Jesus is naming who belongs in his kingdom, and it's not the powerful, the polished, or the privileged. It's the humble, the hurting, the hungry, and the hopeful. Now let's bring this into the world of leadership. We can swallow the blue pill and believe that our lives and leadership will thrive in the power over cavalier way the culture around us lauds. We can believe that leadership is about control, image, dominance, and efficiency. We can believe that knowledge is power, that people are resources, and that success is measured by what we can extract from them. Blue pill leadership is the quote-unquote knowledge is power kind of leadership, a system that takes what you can and gives nothing back. It may seem like wisdom in this world, but beneath it lie the dead bodies. In the end, it dehumanizes and it unforms. But red pill leadership, kingdom leadership, is something entirely different. Red pill leadership is the true kingdom wisdom that is, as Eugene Peterson famously said, a long obedience in the same direction. It is wisdom that is not taken by force, but given by grace through loving communion with our Creator and our Savior. It comes to us as we are formed as Christ's image bearers, schooled in the ways of his kingdom. And the language of this leadership is belonging. Let's sit with that for a moment. The language of kingdom leadership is belonging. It is communication that builds community, not the exploitation of a commodity that we label human resources. It is communication that invites, includes, and honors. It's communication that sees people not as tools, but as image bearers. Jesus' sermon teaches us a new way to be human, even in our leadership, by inviting others to participate, setting a place for them at the table, and celebrating the beloved community that God is creating in our midst for his mission. In a beloved community, leadership communication is dialogic. It fosters new meaning as people interact. It leads to a transformative shared reality for their mission and relationships, and it promotes ownership, shared ownership of that mission. It's poor in spirit, meaning that it's humble. It's merciful, meaning that it's compassionate. It's empathetic. It's peacemaking, meaning that it seeks reconciliation and repair. It hungers and thirsts for justice, meaning that it longs for God's world to be made right. And it blesses when others curse, meaning it refuses to return evil for evil. This is gospel-centered leadership. Let's make this concrete. What does the language of belonging look like in the everyday life of a leader? First, it looks like listening before speaking. Not listening to respond, but listening to understand. Listening that communicates you matter, your voice matters, your story matters. And it creates a hospitable place at the table for you. Secondly, it looks like creating space for others to flourish, setting a table where people feel safe to bring their full selves, making room for diverse voices, perspectives, and experiences. Third, it looks like naming people's dignity, blessing people with your words, calling out their gifts, affirming their worth, speaking life into their identity. And I believe that even when you have to correct people, you can still do that with words that affirm their worth, speaking life into their identity. It is possible to do that in the kingdom of Jesus. We don't have to resort to diminishing, aggressive confrontation or those sorts of worldly tactics. Fourth, it looks like practicing mercy, choosing compassion over condemnation, choosing restoration over punishment, choosing patience over frustration. Fifth, it looks like peacemaking, not peacekeeping, which is avoiding conflict or brushing it under the rug or just assuming that there's no conflict here, but peacemaking, which enters conflict with the goal of reconciliation, repair, and flourishing. I personally believe that we need to cast a wider net in terms of what we mean by conflict. More dominant personalities would look at ordinary, everyday disagreements and say, that's not conflict. But I believe that conflict is everywhere if we have eyes to see it. And honestly, the gospel is a ministry of reconciliation. That means that our whole lives need to be about reconciliation. Even in the smallest disagreement, let's call that conflict and see it as God's invitation to us to be agents of reconciliation and peace, even in the smallest area. We should not be too quick to terminate people. The kingdom of Jesus requires us to work toward reconciliation with the long view in mind. Let's not cancel people. Let's work toward that vision of peace. It is difficult and sometimes painful, for sure, but it is courageous, and it ultimately leads to pushing back the formless and empty and creating sacred space where people flourish. It creates new horizons for mission. It creates new understanding for how we can work together and how we can honor each other and our differences in our working together and our teamwork. Terminating or disciplining people too quickly without doing this hard work is too easy, and it's cowardly And unfortunately, it unleashes the power of the formless and empty back into our cultures and our leadership spaces. Don't take the blue pill here when it comes to conflict, reconciliation, and repair. Don't listen to the voices of this world. Listen to the voice of Jesus and his kingdom ethic of peacemaking. Sixth, it looks like leading from weakness rather than strength. Not pretending to have it all together, not hiding your limitations, but allowing God's power to be made perfect in your weakness. Leaders who think that they know everything and they challenge everyone's point of view with their vision of reality or their ideals are a toxin to healthy, flourishing leadership cultures. My belief is that people will take that for a while, but eventually their image-bearing souls will start to repel it in protest, and it will break. It will explode. Seventh, it looks like blessing those who oppose you, and this is the hardest one, but it is the one that most clearly reveals the kingdom. This is the red pill. This is the way of Jesus. Let's be honest, this kind of leadership feels impractical and illogical. It feels like it won't work in the real world. And that's exactly the point. Kingdom leadership is not built on the logic of this world. It is built on the logic of heaven. It's built on the logic of the cross. It is built on the wisdom of God, which Paul says is foolishness to the world, but it is the power of God to those who are being saved. Jesus tends to speak in the Sermon on the Mount as if he expects us to be able to do this. So we have to take it seriously. The Beatitudes are not a strategy for success. They are a description of the kind of people God blesses and uses to renew the world. The question is not, will this make me more successful? The question is, will this make me more like Christ? And also, will this make much of Christ in my leadership space in our culture? Will Christ be the one lifted up through the way I and we lead together? Are we willing to take the red pill despite the impracticality or illogical nature of such an action and lead as kingdom agents in this world? So let me bring this home. The world is full of blue pill leadership that promises power, control, and success, but ultimately deforms and dehumanizes. But Jesus invites us into a different way of belonging, of blessing, of becoming fully human, a way of leading that reflects the heart of God. This is the language of belonging, the language of the kingdom. This is the language of leadership that heals rather than harms, forms rather than deforms, and builds rather than destroys. And this is the language we are called to speak as leaders. Thank you for joining me today on the Imago Leadership Podcast. In the coming episodes, we'll explore each beatitude in depth and uncover what kingdom leadership looks like in our contemporary world. But for now, I want to leave you with a simple question. Which pill are you choosing in your leadership? Blue or red?
Until next time, may you walk in the blessing of the kingdom, and may your leadership speak the language of belonging.